So last but not least, we have our panel on how to get one of these great fellowships, with a few people who have joined us today who certainly know. So in the same way, I'm going to introduce our three speakers for our final panel, who will come up and join us on stage and then give their talks, and we'll withhold our questions until they're all finished, and they are ready for their panel discussion. So first, we have Mr. Issa Vincent. Issa Vincent joined the Office of Disease Prevention at the NIH as a health scientist in August 2016. He was awarded a 2016 Science and Technology Fellowship from the American Association for the Advancement of Science and chose to serve in the Office of Disease Prevention during his fellowship. Dr. Vincent is interested in international scientific collaboration and has collaborated with scientists in Dusseldorf, Germany. His interests lie in fostering intra- and interagency scientific collaborations, performing portfolio analyses, and disseminating scientific communications to various audiences. Dr. Vincent received a bachelor's in science from biology and a concurrent bachelor of arts in philosophy from Iowa State University before going on to the University of Virginia, Wahoo, to pursue his PhD in microbiology and immunology. Welcome back, Issa. Next, we have Aliyah Schoen. Dr. Aliyah Schoen works as a public policy manager on the policy and business development team at Bloom Energy, a stationary fuel cell manufacturer whose vision is to make clean, reliable energy affordable for everyone in the world. Aliyah received her bachelor's degree in the Integrated Science program at Northwestern University, her master's degree in biological sciences at Stanford, and then worked in protein chemistry department and Genentech. She returned to Stanford for her doctorate in material science and engineering, where she developed protein-based materials to control inorganic nanomaterial synthesis and assembly. As a science policy fellow, she had the privilege of working in the California State Assembly. Welcome, Aliyah. And last but not least, we have Mr. Christopher King. Christopher King is the Executive Director of the Office of Congressional and Government Affairs at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Prior to joining the National Academies, Chris served as the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Congressional and Assistant Secretary for the Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy, where he advised the DOE Secretary and leadership on engagements with U.S. Congress, state, tribal, city, and county governments, and key external stakeholders. After joining the DOE in 2013, Chris served as a senior advisor in the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis, and prior to that, to the Director of Policy Analysis at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. He led a number of successful legislative initiatives, including passage of the America Competes Act and the establishment of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy. Mr. King is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome to all of our panelists here today, and we look forward to learning from your wisdom and experiences. Lisa.
All right. Someone left that one. Okay. Thank you, guys. So I would like to thank all of the other speakers today, because a lot of them were SSS fellows before. So they've made a lot of my job really easy, partially because they've kind of already sold you on like the great opportunities that you're provided as a SSS fellow and where they are ending up. And really, as I was telling someone just a little bit ago, I'm also here for myself, not just for you guys. I can meet them as well and kind of make this a networking part. And it's really, that's one of the great things about the SSS Fellowship, is that part of the process is not just the job that they help to give you, it's also the opportunities to do this networking, getting involved in science at all these different levels, as well as initiatives that are outside of science to help move kind of things that are important to the public forward. Just to kind of, again, my name is Issa Vincent. I'm at the Office of Disease Prevention. All right. So just kind of a very brief background of the SSS. I'm going to actually kind of give an overview really from my perspective at the NIH, because as you've kind of seen from a lot of the different speakers today, is that the whole experience is really tailored partially on the applicant, but also on the office that they end up in. So I'm really kind of NIH-centric, so I kind of know how the workings of the fellowship really works at the NIH. So established in 1973, we're coming up on, we were discussing this earlier, we're coming on 45 years of helping scientists become more not politically savvy, but policy savvy, and understand how either they could contribute to science from their bench or participate in science at the government level. The fellowships provide an opportunity for science and engineers to learn about policy. This is not kind of a lab fellowship. There are some other fellowships that are able to give you kind of that bench as well as policy experience. And I would also say, hopefully in the future, you'll hear things from, say, some of the FDA's commissioner fellows. They're also a great other opportunity to get involved with policy. And the program, specifically for the NIH, started in 2001. And then they have been really heavily invested in recruiting fellows. And that's partially because that's kind of, NIH has a fundamental drive to kind of develop researchers, but also develop scientists in a lot of different capacities. So they understand kind of training. So this is the picture of my class at the NIH. So just some basic understanding of the fellows. You have to be kind of a U.S. citizen, but you cannot be a federal employee. It's a PhD, MD, or other terminal degree, and as well in science or engineering. And in engineering, you could actually have a master's degree to apply. And what you see is that they come from a wide variety of career paths. I have had the opportunity, my current fellowship class, we have people that are taking a sabbatical from like senior leadership at Boeing to take a year or two off to come do the fellowship. And we also have people that have come straight out of graduate school to come help the fellowship. The key features, you have to have exceptional communication skills, sensitivity towards policy issues, and a strong interest in applying knowledge towards science policy. Because as several people have already mentioned, sometimes you will be the only scientist in the room. Not necessarily the NIH. NIH, again, is PhD heavy, kind of just like Megan was saying about the NSF. You are a scientist amongst your peers, and you guys have to communicate and try to build coalitions and networks to try to get a particular task done. But if you work in some other agencies, you'll be the science go-to for all these issues. A friend of mine is working within the State Department, and she was trained as a doctor, but she's now actually working in, I do believe, animal protection in Africa. So it was a really big kind of policy shift. And someone else from here was an immunologist with me, worked in my same lab, but now he's working in North Atlantic ocean treaties. So this is my science policy class. I actually shifted everything to this side because if you look on the left side, there was actually a couple prior UVA graduate students and postdocs that are actually ended up here. So I'm that very large-headed individual in the back. But we have Keisha up front, who is also an undergraduate here as well as a graduate student, as we have someone from the Grant Lab over in MR6. So this is kind of the breakdown. We have 278 year-long fellows, and that's kind of split between incoming class of 183 first-year fellows, as well as a second-year class of 91 fellows. And then that's broken down into, you have 240 AAAS executive branch fellows, and they're deployed through a variety of agencies of varying sizes. And then you also have the legislative branch fellows, and those 34 fellows are supported by individual partner societies that help support that fellow in placement in a legislative office. And then finally, we have a judicial branch fellow, which is kind of a rare animal who is positioned, usually they have a JD or legal experience, and then they're placed in to help support the judicial branch. And then this is a very rare fellowship for more senior established researchers, and that's usually only comes up once every 4 years. So just to kind of walk you through the process that you'll have to do when you kind of apply, just the year-long timeline. When applications are due, applications open May 1st and are due by November 1st. After that submission process, you go through a selection process, and of those finalists that are selected, you go on to do a briefing, memo, and interview. Those that survive that process, sorry, not survive, that's a bad way to put that, sorry. Those who excel at this point go on into the finalist interview week, where they invite you to DC to interview with all the potential host offices. And you guys are both interviewing each other to see what is the best mutual fit between you. Then you both submit your rankings. So if you're kind of acquainted to how medical school matching occurs, you submit a ranked list of your top favorites, and they submit a rank of their top candidates, and then they try to do the best matching between the two lists. And then what naturally occurs is that sometimes you have to do an additional interview or two, because you may not have had the time in that very brief window of about a week to find that office when they only had like a day to interview about 40 candidates for this, and they're like, we need to actually have a little bit of extra time. So you may have to do another interview during the matching process week. And then finally you have your office, you think you're ready, and then you do about 2 months of applications and filing all of your potential security clearances, background checks, working with HR to make sure you have your badge. You may have to make a trip up to DC or to your local police station to get yourself fingerprinted. And these are all different kinds of processes that you just have to kind of do to actually get hired into the government. And it really depends on which side you're working on. I know I'm considered a federal employee, so I had to go through a different kind of background process than some who come in and they kind of technically work for a organization that works with the AAAS, and they're considered employees of them. So they do a slightly different process and a less complicated process than, say, me. And then your fellowship starts at the beginning of September, and you go through an interview. You'll hear Matt talk again. You'll actually see a lot of these faces again as they give talks about different sections of the government to really jumpstart your whole process. And then after this, it's a long process of how often and really how engaged you want to be with the fellowship that defines on how you're interacting with the AAAS and the policy fellowship. You could be kind of a distantly related fellow who you only see once in a while, but then you also have the people that are engaged not just in the issues of their office, but are also helping lead initiatives working with the AAAS, who are working with a bunch of different agencies to try to bring up new science issues. So, looking at the assessment of what your application will be looked at is if you see you kind of have the big bulk will be your scientific and technical background and professional accomplishment. So that's both your papers, your presentations, your accolades. All those things come into a very large chunk of about 40 points. But just about 60 points of it will also be other key features that they see as necessary for the policy fellowship, such as your leadership potential, your communication skills, and your problem-solving ability, because you will likely be placed in an office that will not necessarily fall into your scientific discipline. And then you have to be able to learn to adapt, use some of the skills that you may have learned in an abstract way to help solve the problems of that office. So this is just kind of covering where in 2017 and 2018 we have placements. As you of course see, NIH is one of the larger components of that. I've drank the Kool-Aid from the NIH, and I really do enjoy working for the NIH. But we also see NSF is represented very well, and actually a lot of the fellows between NSF, we have very similar work environments and work descriptions, so we actually work kind of closely, and we kind of learn similar skills together. But you also have people that working in the Department of State, the DoD, USAID, and all these agencies have a very distinct and unique features for their particular fellows, and that's what kind of makes the fellowship really unique, is that you will have a very personalized and sculpted experience based on wherever you happen to land and who you are. So, but thinking really beyond the fellowship is actually the selling point, because while having the job is the kind of the best part and really what they have you there for, they expect you to do stuff outside of the fellowship, to make those connections and skills and networking, but you're also being able to contribute to science as a whole. And if you kind of look at it as a pie chart, you're working, but you should be putting in, just like now, work outside of the 40-hour work week, where you're looking at like 50 and 60 hours, building skills, making networking connections, and what have you. And you sometimes are able to kind of dabble in multiple pots at the same time. And really, that's how you can really be efficient, where you're saying, oh, I'm going to happen to go give a talk at UVA, but while I'm there, I'm going to try to make some networking connections, work on some of the possible connections I need to make in the future. There we go. So after you leave the fellowship, I could probably have just dismissed this slide all completely because the panelists have provided an accurate view of where you could kind of end up after the fellowship, where you can go either back into the government, academia, industry, or nonprofits. What you see is that about 25% actually go back into academia or from whatever their initial industry was. And that's partially because some of them are at stages in their career where they took the idea of going on a AAAS fellowship and decided to say, I want to learn more about policy, but I want to take that experience and bring it back to the academic environment, to the company, to whatever, or the NGO that they may be working on. But then other people say, policy wasn't for me, and they head back. But you also see people take the route, say, all right, I learned these skills about the government. I'm going to teach industry how to better interact with the government. Or working in the nonprofit world because they found a specific cause that they are actually really invested in, and they found to make those connections to eventually end up in that kind of position. So, interested in becoming a fellow. So, as they were talking earlier, this is a competitive process. So the numbers right there, 800, 200, 150, is really the rough estimations that I recall from our orientation week. So once you're done with the whole process, you're finally starting in your office, and they say, all right, here's some of the nitty-gritty stuff behind the scenes. This is what really what are the numbers, where you place, where you're coming from. And so what they get is about 800 to 1,000 applications every year for a policy fellowship. And from that number, they get it down to about 200 to 250 potential interviewees to take to the interview week. And then from there, they'll finally get that number down to about 200 to 150 of the finalists that will actually get positions. And that's also kind of, some people turn it down. Sometimes there's life events. Sometimes they get a better offer because these people are actually competitive in the business world, in the academic world. They're not just trying to do policy as some other avenue as an escape. So these people are always competitive. So you do see some people saying, I can't take the fellowship, love to have, but no. I definitely was applying to this one and in the CCST as well. And it was really kind of a hard judge between the two, just depending. But since my parents live on this coast, they're getting older, I decided to take the AAAS fellowship, put me in DC. Here are some of the tips to consider when you're applying. There is a criteria and evaluation page. Please read that very carefully. It really tells you how they're going to be evaluating your application, and that page has say these are what we're looking for. Can you demonstrate your competency in these areas? And this is a great skill building activity that you could be using, because if you could respond well to that page, you'd be able to answer USA Jobs application, because they're doing the same. You have to pass that same certification process, which goes for the same thing. You need to say, can you demonstrate your ability to work in groups? Can you demonstrate your ability to organize? Have a clear and detailed idea of why you want to do this, but be prepared at some point to say, I'm willing to be flexible. As I said before, a lot of the fellows that I know, they have a content area expertise, and they kind of had an idea of what really drives them scientifically. But they were able to say, I'm here to learn the skills that I need to be able to be good in policy. I don't necessarily need to work in my content area expertise to be able to do that. And I think I actually got some really great advice from Tim Bender, when he said, it was like, you're not actually here to be trained to be X, Y, or Z, like work on X or Y or Z topic. You were here to learn how to be a scientist. And so that same kind of philosophy works here. You're not here to become that wonk in that office for that specific role. You're here to learn the skills that should be cross-applicable across a lot of different dimensions. But there are some things that you learn about the culture of a particular agency that may be useful, that you say, it might be hard for me to go from NIH to DoD. It's just, it's kind of a big jump, but if you learn how to be adaptable, learn how to work in federal agencies, they're always looking for people that can actually do that. And then focus on the offices and area descriptions. Usually on the AAAS website, they'll list who have taken fellows in the current class. And really, those are also the kind of the offices that are looking every year for new fellows. They're saying, they love the AAAS, they like what they do. Usually, they are often led by previous fellows, and they put that out there. So you should speak to that. You're like, oh, this office seems interesting. I should make a call out to that office. Just in the application, not a real call. Please don't call these people. And then have an idea, eventually interview strategy, being able to be comfortable in talking to these people about what your interests are. They have you write a briefing memo, which I think is just a way to panic you a little bit and see how you handle dealing with a little bit of pressure and how do you respond. Like, they give you like 10 days to write a briefing memo. I don't think any of you have been trained on how to write a briefing memo, so you have to learn in 10 days how to write a briefing memo and learn enough information on the random topic they give you. So doing all of this in 10 days is frightening. And then saying the first bit of your interview will only be about them asking questions about that briefing memo. Can you handle that? Because sometimes you'll be called upon to do that. You'll be called by your assistant director, your director, and is like, so can you tell me about this issue? I definitely have been working on something in my cubicle, and my director would appear behind me. He's like, oh, that looks like an interesting graph. What is this about? And I'm like, all right, now I needed to still give him enough background to talk about this random topic that will probably never reach that high up. But he was just interested because, he knows I'm the fellow in the office, and he just wants to be kind of open and available to me. So those are just some basic strategies. I know I will actually call upon any of the other prior fellows to give their own insights on how they applied some of the hurdles that I probably didn't think of when they're applying. Oh, also, wear comfortable shoes. If you actually make it to interview week, you'll be doing a lot of walking. I think, that is a tough week. But all right, thank you. Oh, yeah, and then if you want to find out more, and not just from me and my limited purview, they do have a series of chat series with other fellows in other agencies, and they're all current fellows. So you talk about the process. They're of different ages. They're of different backgrounds, so it's a great opportunity to engage with them. All right, thank you.
Let's see if I can do this without any feedback here. Perfect. I'll be giving a talk on black slides. Okay. Great. So my name is Alia Showen. I come from that other coast, on the other side of the country. I'm not from California originally. I'm from Chicago, but I've been out in California for the last 15 years, and so I've seen a lot of policy and politics changes out there as well. I'm going to be talking today about the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. It's a big mouthful. I was a Year 5 fellow. That means that I was in the legislature in 2014. Where's the little guy? What did I just hit? Great. So CCST, first of all, this is not the fellowship, but it's the umbrella organization that sort of oversees us. And what is it? They're basically professors and people who are eminent in their field that happen to reside in California that are a council, essentially, of an advisory to the government. And so they've been around for almost 30 years. They're nonpartisan, they're nonprofit, they're meant to be an impartial source of information for the government, for whomever wants to have information given to them. For example, a couple of the fellows from my class are now working with CCST to develop reports around biogas in the state of California and around natural gas storage in the state of California that happen to coincide with certain types of policies that the state is looking at now. So it's impartial reporting information. The fellowship itself, so this is my class, there's 10 of us, so we are smaller than AAAS, small but mighty, and there were 11 of us. There was one other person who joined this year, and she was the pilot person who went the executive branch. So you notice that's one big difference between, I think, AAAS and this fellowship. I worked in the legislature. We all worked in the legislature, so it's a little bit different flavor. I'll note that Nathan, this gentleman on the end over here, was a professor at Boston College, and he came out and similar to sort of what was said before, is that you have people that are not only looking for new careers, but looking for information. And so he came out and worked and got just a wealth of information that he's taken back to Boston College now and has developed some curriculum around, which is really interesting. The rest of us were straight out of our PhDs. The fellowship itself was created in 2009. It's relatively new. So we're currently recruiting our 10th class. It's great that I'm standing here talking to you. I have some information about the timeline at the end of the talk. And essentially, this is what we've been talking about all day, right? Why have a policy fellowship? And I think California is a great place to have it. We are a rather large state with a rather large economy, and having those policy discussions and sort of good policy information in California helps also, I think, sort of translate across the country as well in certain areas. My particular area of interest was energy, which is why I stuck in California. And really the idea, I see it as two ways. It's not just to enable scientists to inform policy decisions, but it's also, I think, and something that maybe some other people have touched on briefly, but I think the most important thing I took away from my fellowship time was understanding of how government works and how we fit in and how we don't fit in, right? Like the decision is many things. It's not just based on science. There's politics, there's money, there's basically timing in some cases as well. And so it's understanding that whole context of the government that you're operating in was something that was really, I think, impactful to me. Because I went in, I was like, I want to do alternative energy. We're going to put solar panels on every roof, right? And that's just not, it's not a feasible thing, but it's something that folks talk about and understand why it's feasible or not. So this is again kind of a high-level overview. PhD-level scientists, so you have to essentially have your PhD. You can apply before you have it, but they expect that you finish your PhD before you come into the program. It's a one-year fellowship in the legislature. So there were people that were placed in the Senate. There were people that were placed in the Assembly. There are also folks that get placed on committee staff. So you would be working on one particular issue area, like the Health Committee, the Energy Committee, the Transportation Committee. I myself was in the Assembly in a legislative office. So I was a legislative staffer in a personal office. I worked on many issue areas, and I'll touch on that in a second. It's modeled after the AAAS Congressional Fellowship Program. It's not quite the same, right? So we talked about some key differences. The application process is also a little different. We came up with those bunch of 10 people before we went and did our matching, right? And so that's somewhat different. I think it makes the matching maybe a little harder and a little more of a black box, but you're all kind of put together before you actually interview with anybody. And then it's smaller. It's a smaller program. It's 10 fellows a year. And the thing, I was terrified, actually, when they were like, oh, great, you're going to do this boot camp training. So you arrive in November 1st. They actually just started the new class. You have a month-long training session where you basically learn how to stop thinking like a bench scientist and start thinking like an extroverted scientist. I'm introverted, and so this is really tough for me. But essentially, they go over the legislature. You do mock hearings. You also write briefing memos, and they give you like an hour to write a briefing memo, and it's basically here's the fast-paced legislature that you're going to be working in, and let's see how you do. And this is exactly what you're going to be doing. I thought that they do a really great job of developing curricula. As alumni, we still continue to help them develop curricula based on our experiences. How do you analyze a bill? How do you run a bill? How do you write a bill? And things like that. It was really valuable. And it's really, like I mentioned this before, it's more than science. And so the issue areas, I worked for Assemblymember Doss Williams. He represented the Santa Barbara area of California, that's Central Coast. It happens to also be the birthplace of many environmental movements. And so he was a great office for me to be in, right? He was very interested in science and technology and the environment and natural resources. And when I came in, the way that our office worked, again, depending on your assignment, wherever you end up being, every office is different. Our office basically said, here's our 20 issue areas we cover, and we're going to assign issue areas to each person. So I had natural resources, I had energy, I had health. I also had banking and finance. I also had public safety. I also had taxes, so you do get this opportunity to work outside of your area of expertise. And I wasn't working on nanomaterials at all, right? There was no nanomaterial policy. But it's just that intellectual curiosity you have and the ability to take complicated things and make talking points for your boss. He's going to speak on the floor. As was said earlier, your job as a staffer is to make your boss look good. especially in the legislature. I feel like they're always trying to look real good so they can get reelected. And so I think that, as an example, one of the biggest bills that I actually ran was around, it was gun policy, right? And like when my boss goes out and talks in his community about how great his fellow was, I was sitting at a table and he said the biggest bill she ran was not the bill about bees and neonicotinoids she ran, it was the one about gun policy and mental health, right? And it's strange, right? You would never walk into a fellowship thinking that, but what a growth opportunity that was for me to understand politics in a very controversial area. Regardless of your feeling about it, it's the ability to bring stakeholders together and to talk about things and to work it out and find a middle ground. And that, I think, is maybe what the sort of the legislature type of fellowship gets you, is that sort of ability to sort of suss out policy and find compromise rather than simply informing and directing all the science policy, which is also very important. Alumni, where are we now? Many of my colleagues and many of the folks that have gone through the fellowship are still in either the legislature or in the agencies. Many of us get hired into our offices. They like us so much they want to keep us. And then also, it's very easy and straightforward to transfer into a state agency from there. One of the nice things about our time in the fellowship is on a weekly basis we meet. It's similar. You can show up or not show up. On a weekly basis we meet, and we met with like heads of agencies. So the head of the natural resources, CDFA, CalRecycle, those types of, the heads come and sit down with us, and you can ask them anything, right? Or you could ask, they brought some lobbyists in too in some really interesting issue areas. And so you make this network and these connections where it enables you to, if you would like to, transition from the bench into a policy arena. I myself ended up I'm one of the 12% in the private sector, so I work on business development, which is also a new and exciting field for me, but I still work in policy. I still talk to those people that I met in the building. The reason I have my job is because I met the lobbyist for the company I work for in the building. And so I just can't speak highly enough about these fellowships as a way to transition and to meet people, essentially. And just my last slide, I'm going to just talk very high level about the application process. We're currently recruiting. Applications are opening shortly. They'll be due at the end of February, interviews in May. So the way that our applications work, our briefing memos and everything kind of start earlier than that, and then you interview. And that's like, they'll ask you about your briefing memos. One of the questions is, what do you think the top 3, and this was my year, I don't know if it's still true, but what do you think the top 3 issue areas in California are, right? And if chances are, if you say it's your scientific issue area, you're wrong. I think it's usually like health policy, prisons, and water were kind of my year. And so it's just the purpose of the interview is to kind of gauge your emotional intelligence. Are you like a nice person, right? Are you an adaptable person, and can you perform under pressure, right? You were sitting at this long table of people, both from the building and scientists, and Art Bienenstock was sitting right here next to me. I was just like kind of in celeb mode. But they're asking you questions, and they're pressing you, and they're challenging your assumptions, right? It's very similar to everything you do every day here. Those are all skills that we all have, and you have to just be able to be adaptable and flexible. It's a 1-year fellowship. Starts in November. That's the website to apply. I actually realized I forgot to put my contact information, but I have cards, so if anyone wants to talk to me, I'm happy to, and please ask a lot of questions.
Is now okay. Excellent. Thanks. Okay, so you're in luck because I will go quickly off through my slides. Sorry, let me do this real quick. I am also working off of a colleague's on some of these slides, working off a colleague's slides that runs the Merzine Fellowship Program. So I'm going to refer to a separate deck that's up here on some notes and some things that I don't know about. And then if there's questions on Merzine, we can come back to them, or I can point you in the right direction. So, start off here. Okay, so what I'm going to cover is just a little bit about what the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is, what we do, who we are, why we exist, where we are, and what we are not. And I think that's also an important part of our identity and the role that we play in the science policy ecosystem is what we are not as the National Academies. I'll talk a little bit about the Marzine Fellowship, as I discussed. And then I'm going to give just a little bit of advice on success in fellowships, because I've seen over the course of my 16 years in Washington now, I did not start off as a fellow, but I have worked for, then with, and then hired a number of fellows. And so I think I've seen a lot of successes, and I've seen some really sort of fantastic failures. So I think I have gained a pretty good perspective over what makes for a successful fellowship for people, and how that transitions into a career in policy in Washington. As I said, I started 16 years ago. I showed up in Washington with a car full of luggage, 2 bikes, 2 fly rods, 2 suits, and I was pretty sure I didn't want to use the suits very much, and I wanted to use everything else. But I was very, very lucky. Timing was everything. I got my foot in the door with the local congressman. Next thing, he was on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and this is in 2001. I was an intern, and I was working with the AAAS fellow and some other sort of veteran staff that were there. I was the youngest person on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee staff, and I was on the Democratic staff at the time. I was the youngest person by 12 years. It was a very senior staff. That's a lot of committees on the Hill at that time were very senior, people that had been there for a long time, that had been making policy since the 70s. And so that isn't the case anymore, actually. A lot of those folks have gone. People don't stick around as much as they used to. But the one piece of continuity is that the AAAS fellowship, among other fellowships, has really continued to supply a pretty steady source of talent. Let me turn that away. That has really underpinned a whole lot of policy. 2003, just quickly, since we're talking about sort of career tracks, and just to give you a sense of how luck plays a lot into it. 2003, we started working on the Energy Policy Act. 2003, I was assigned a couple of things to work on here and there. Next thing I know, I got just fascinated enough in a few areas and wrote some legislation, and sure enough, a member picked it up, and then it ended up in the bill. We go through conference. Well, the bill dies in conference in 2003. Next thing you know, we pick it back up in 2005 for the Energy Policy Act of 2005. Suddenly, I went from an intern to having several provisions enacted in law, and really in a short amount of time. From there, we started working on then the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, and at the same time, the America Competes Act in 2007. And from that point, got multiple things into these bills and enacted in law. And again, this is just being the right place at the right time. It was also a time in which Congress was very active on science policy, and energy and environmental policy in particular. And then from that point, just again to show you how these things align, in 2009 we got the American Recovery and Reinvestment and Recovery Act. I always forget which R is first. This injected a massive amount of money into the science and technology enterprise and into energy issues, and in particular, it funded a program that I had been working on for a few years called ARPA-E, which Bill, I don't think Bill's still here, but Bill went into some depth on. So I have been very lucky, and a lot of it was just sitting still, just being in the right place at the right time, and then sitting there working really hard, as Robbie said, being that water that trickles over the stone, and just putting in the hours for several years. And I'll go into a little bit on why I think that timeline is really important when you're thinking about fellowships. A little bit on the, there we go. A little bit on the National Academies. This is the most important thing about the National Academies of Sciences. We are advisors to the nation, and there's a lot that's built into that statement. We were created in 1863 by President Lincoln, ostensibly to look at how to take a science and technology approach to winning the Civil War. And so we were, one of the early defense sort of analysis contractors, if you will. Then in 1916, we formed what was called the National Research Council. This is the body that performs a lot of the work that you've probably used in your work when you've used NRC reports. Then the National Academy of Engineering was founded in 1964, and then the Institute of Medicine, which later became the National Academy of Medicine in 1970. In providing advice to the nation, so the advice part is important because we are essentially an if-asked institution, right? And I'll get into a little bit of our process in a second. But we provide advice when we are asked for advice. And what is key to our process and what makes us unique, and I'm not just saying this, I'm not just bragging, is the independence and objective advice. Because that is very much baked into every component of our process as being independent and objective. We also have a history of excellence. We joke that we have sort of eminence-based reports sometimes. The National Academies, being a member of the National Academies of Sciences still remains, or the National Academy of Engineering or Medicine, still remains one of the top honors of an academic professional. Just very quickly, these are the presidents. This is Dr. Marcia McNutt, who's the president of the National Academies of Sciences. She's also the head of the National Research Council, which we actually call the National, which now has changed. So if your research might have National Research Council, it might from here on also say National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Same thing. Dan Moat is the president of the National Academy of Engineering, and Dr. Victor Zhao is the president of the National Academy of Medicine. So about studies. Again, I want to go a little bit into our process because to talk about the Merzine Fellowships and talk about working at the academies, you have to understand a little bit why we are unique. We do an incredible volume of studies and workshops every year. I thought that I knew the academies well when I went to the academies. I've been working in the space, science, technology policy for 16 years. I had no idea the minute that I got in the door just how high volume of an institution it is. We do about 70% of this is requested in some form by the U.S. government. So we are not a government entity. We're not National Science Foundation, which a lot of people think we are, and people in this room won't, but a lot of people think we are. We're not AAAS. When I took this job 9 months ago, I got a lot of congratulations on going to work with Rush Holt and others at AAAS and fighting for science. We don't fight for science. We help form the underpinning of science in the policymaking process. But in terms of advocating for funding, we are not AAAS in that sense either. We don't get direct appropriations from Congress. We get appropriations through federal agencies, and sometimes appropriations bill will direct agencies to do a study with us, but that is not the only way that we get direction. We can also get it from third parties, directly from agencies, or sometimes even internally through the academies. The objective and independent part of our process comes into in several ways. One is that the sponsor of our project, doesn't get to tell us. They can tell us what to do, and they in terms of the major questions to ask, and they can give us money. But from that point on, they can't tell us what the results of our process will be, and that's very much left to a study committee, which would be 10 to 20 experts. Multidisciplinary. Usually, you would have if you have 10 to 20 experts, about half of them would be subject matter experts in the question that's being reviewed, and about half will have never seen it before. Will know nothing about it. They may be ethicists, they may be lawyers, they may be economists, they may be practitioners in the field, but that's also very important that we have a multidisciplinary approach. it's an extremely rigorous peer review process on the back end, and that's another thing that makes us unique. Let's see. And let me just say, I invite you to look at nap.edu. If you haven't before, just take a few minutes to look at nap.edu. Look through the number of reports that we've done in recent years. Plug in a keyword, something you find interesting. There's a solid chance that sometime in the last 10 to 15 years, and maybe even more recently, we've done some work on it, either workshops or big consensus studies. So real quickly, how are we viewed on the Hill? So who cares what we do? Who cares why and why we do what we do? And embedded in this question is, what is the state of science in the policymaking process today? This is a snapshot, more or less, of today. Maybe things have changed by one or two in the last few days. But right now, there are 107 pieces of legislation that either call for a National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine study, or mention or cite National Academies' work in the legislation. And just this year, we have gone to the Hill 73 times on 33 different reports, and 3 witnesses have testified. The important thing to know about this is not only do we get a lot of traction on the Hill. When I was at the Department of Energy, the jurisdictional coverage of the Department of Energy was pretty limited to about eight committees. On the Hill, the National Academies of Sciences, I've been shocked, has been just about every single committee on the Hill has some equity with the academies. The one thing that has gone down this year, and it's hard to put too much, to attribute it too much, but the witnesses that have testified, this is something that troubles us a little bit. Because that is a big component of what the academies has provided over the last 100 years is expert testimony. We're not seeing the nature of hearings on the Hill requiring that kind of testimony. Now we still provide a lot of advice to the nation in lots of other forums. We're just not seeing that level of discourse on the Hill. So how do you get involved? A little bit on Merzine Fellowship. I do not run the Merzine program. I've only been there for a few years, but I have some slides and I'm going to walk you through it, and if I can't answer any questions, I'll deflect you to a colleague of mine. And like I said, I'm really going to be speaking from this point on my observations on fellowships in general. The Merzine Fellowship is for you, right? And a lot of fellowship programs, offices, especially on the Hill, tend to think of them as like free labor, and not only on the Hill but at agencies. It's we're going to get someone in here, we're not going to have to pay them very much. They're going to come in, they're going to work their butts off for 60 hours a week. We're going to get some free labor out of them. This one is really for you to learn, and a lot of that is the fact that it is. There we go. Okay, it's a 12-week program, not very long by many standards. There is a nice stipend in this, and it's open to graduate students and postdocs that have completed studies in the last 5 years. It's also open. I think there was a question earlier, to foreign nationals or F1 or J1 visas. What you're going to work on, all right, okay. First, the fellow is assigned a mentor, a very key component of the process. And you will be, and this mentor, you will work on a board. We have approximately 60 boards, standing boards at the academies. So lots of different things. What you'll work on the day-to-day really depends on what study they're working on at that time. These are skills, and what you'll do on this board is doing a lot of sort of the research that you're familiar with. But you're also going to be doing some very public-facing work. You're going to be identifying experts, which is key, developing meetings, doing the kind of drafting and editing that's very important to our process, This is the kind of skill set that will serve you well throughout a federal or policy career, even beyond federal. There we go. Make sure that's all of it. All right. Also, this is important too, is what you'll be doing outside of your immediate work, and this is really just getting the exposure to the larger policy ecosystem in Washington. Oh, and then you get to have lunch with the presidents, which is. Sorry, as I said, I borrowed this slide from a colleague, and I didn't know that these were animated. All right, this is pretty self-explanatory, obviously, but really, there's no better way to get to understand the ecosystem of science and technology policy than to figure out what your role is in it, and everything in Washington is a process, and that so getting a firsthand view of that process is very instructive. Obviously, you get out of the lab for a little bit and set up a network of peers and explore career options and pathways. So where do people go after this? So many stay on as temporary or permanent staff at the academies, or they go into AAAS fellows after this, or they get employment on the Hill at agencies, NGOs, think tanks, DC offices of corporations, etc. A third of them stay in DC. Many go back and finish degrees or postdocs, accept faculty positions or other positions at universities. And then many will go on to international organizations or state and local government. I can't express enough the value of doing some time in the state or local government agency. Really, the one downside of coming to DC is that you're so often so far removed, especially if you work in the legislature, you're often so far removed from the impacts of what you're working on that you really don't see it. You don't see these impacts for years. But at the state and local level, you can often literally see the projects that you're working on. There we go. Okay, so this is just a few short observations, and then I'll turn it over to Q&A on what I've seen in my experience on the Hill. And I've seen, like I said, some really fabulous successes, people that have gone on to become staff directors and chiefs of staff, assistant secretaries or undersecretaries at agencies. The successes of policy fellowship programs are well known. Even if you're not at all involved, if you're in the policy world, if you're not involved in science and technology policy, chances are very good you still know what the AAAS fellowship program is. But a few things to really, what I would say would be to help you optimize your experience there is, one, remember that 1 year is a very short amount of time, and 3 months, and for the Merzine Fellowship is even shorter, obviously. The congressional process is a 2-year process. 1 year depends on, it really depends on where you parachute into that, whether it's the beginning or the end. Doesn't give you the full glimpse of the process, of the policymaking process. I get a lot of informational interviews with folks that are coming to DC, and they're like, well, I want to go to the Hill. What should I expect? Like, how long should I do that? Should I go do an internship? I really want to get Hill experience. My advice has always been, if you want Hill experience, you need to think of it as a 4-year commitment. And really, if you really want Hill, if you really want to be a part of the Hill, it's at least a 6-year trajectory, if not more. I was on the Hill for almost 12 years. For my purposes, that was about 2 years too long, but those 10 years were incredibly dynamic, and I did nothing but learn and excel in those 10 years. And that is because it's 2-year cycles. The first 2 years, you don't know what you don't know. The second 2 years, you at least have a sense of this broader ecosystem, of the processes, the nonlinear processes that lead to policymaking. And really in that third 2 years, your third Congress, this is where you become a little bit of an expert. You become probably, in many cases, the expert on something on the Hill, or one of the few. That's a really important role to play. It's a very fun role to play. And from that point on, you become a go-to person, and it's a really rewarding experience. So I would say, anything that you're looking at for a time in DC, think of it as a longer-term commitment. Think about not only the fellowship itself, but what you're going to do after that, and go ahead and set yourself up on that trajectory. It's also critically important that you hit the ground running. Again, a year is not a long time. I just was in a briefing with 2 Canals fellows from NOAA last week, and 2 different briefings, and they both started the briefing with, my year's coming to an end, I can't believe it's almost over. It's like they're just realizing how to work in this space, and it's almost over. So really think ahead of time about sticking. If this is the kind of career experience you want, think about it as a multi-year commitment. Jurisdiction. Just a quick note on jurisdiction. This is wonky, but it's absolutely critical. If there's a problem space you want to work in, there's a federal agency that works on it. There's a committee on the Hill that has jurisdiction over that federal agency. There are members on that committee. Those are the members. That's the committee you want to work on. If you're really committed to working in a particular space, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, I would recommend, just as Isa was saying, to be flexible, but think very, very hard about who it is you want to work for, whether it's a committee or a member. You're not going to go into a member's office and work on an issue that he or she doesn't have jurisdiction over, if he's not on a committee of jurisdiction. Also, rethink how you think. We've talked a little bit about this, but I do think that this is very important. And if I saw any, what I would consider sort of failures, hardships from on the Hill, it was the inability of folks to move out of the very linear, empirical way of thinking that you get in academia. And finally, read. Read a lot. Read a lot of things that have nothing to do with what you're working on. And there is a ton of material at your disposal just about anywhere you walk in Washington, D.C., whether it's the Hill, Politico, Roll Call, look at American Institute of Physics FYI online, AAAS. Really get out of your issue area and understand how you fit into the broader ecosystem of policy. So I will just leave it at that and open what very few minutes we have left to Q&A. So. Shall we sit down here? You want to kill that? All right.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty similar, just in terms of the order is different, right? So there's the 10 of us that get picked, and essentially the way it works is there's a set of committees. I think it's all committees now, but in my year it was a set of committees and a set of legislative offices that basically signed up to get a fellow, and we interviewed with all of them. I think it's a comfortable shoes thing is real. It's a lot of walking around and up and down stairs, but meeting with 40 offices over the course of a week and interviewing is not only good for the interviewing and making sure you get a good match, but also you meet people, right? Like, it's so much easier to pick up the phone and call someone if you know that you met that staffer during your interview and you kind of liked them, right? And they're a good resource. And so it's very much the same, and it's every interview is different. One interview I had, said, if you had any superpower, what would it be? And you're like, that's seriously your question? But, that was the kind of interview that their office thought was important, and they were a really dynamic and fun office for the fellow that worked there. Other interviews are a lot more technical, but that's essentially how it works. And then you rank, they rank, you rank, everybody, there's this big black box machine that goes through, and then, everyone hopefully ends up happy with where they're placed. It's a little higher risk because you don't get as much of a say in where you're placed. They try very hard to have a conversation with you about what are your priorities, right? So they knew that again, flexibility is key, right? My priorities were energy and natural resources, and I lucked out and got into an office. I really thought I wanted to work on the energy committee, though. I was like, what, I'm in a personal office, what? It turned out to be the best thing I could have ever done. I think that I lucked out a lot. So it's flexibility and not only what you want to work on, but also like where you end up, be open-minded about what happens.
And just a little bit of clarification. So for AAAS, so I'm an executive fellow, so I have more of that understanding. But the Congressional Fellowship, theirs works like that as well. So their interview week is not in the spring, it's after our orientation week. So they have 1 week after the orientation where they're meeting with offices doing the same thing, but it's just swapped. So it's just like that.
Same
Yeah.
with
I just don't know it as well. So.
Can you talk a little bit about application tips, specifically what skills to highlight and how to highlight them?
So at least when I was saying looking at that valuation page, criterion evaluation, it does highlight what they're looking for skills. I can't name them off the top of my head, but they're looking for usually like different agencies will, and you kind of see that from the bio, because they'll provide some of the potential offices that you could work for, and their bios tend to highlight what their fellow is going to do in their office. And if you want to work on that, you should kind of shape yours to fill that position. But you should think about it as you should be highlighting your leadership experience from not just academic, but also looking in the community, seeing that you can engage and be engaged in a lot of different processes, and it's not just because I'm a scientist, I'm only working on scientist issues, because you might not be working on scientist issues. You should be able to speak to organizational stuff. So being able to say, all right, I was able to bring this project to fruition. I had people that reported to me directly. I'm not totally sure what they're looking for.
It's very similar, yeah. So this idea of highlighting leadership, and especially if you have work that you've done out in your community, or where you've had to manage up, right? So this kind of like influence without any actual power, because that's what you do as a staffer, to be quite honest. And yeah, also your scientific expertise, and especially if you're interested in a particular issue area, highlighting that as well. But I think these kind of other kind of non-science, like squishier skills, right, like leadership and community engagement, and the ability to reach compromises. If you're a really great compromiser, highlight that, right? If you're interested in legislative work in particular, that's probably the most important thing that you can have.
I think one thing you should be wary of is going in with the attitude, especially on the Hill, but also at agencies, going in with the attitude that science is the only thing that matters in policy making. Right. That if I tell you, if you're asking a question and I give you the answer, you should act on that answer and that answer alone. And as we've talked about through other parts of this discussion today, there's lots of direct and indirect factors in this. That everything from values to politics, to what gets press, how do you raise funds, and both through
who's in charge of the committee.
Who's in charge of the committee? So there's a lot of things. If you show at first that you accept that as a fact, as reality, that's a pretty big step in the right direction. Yeah. And then if you actually show that you want to work through those processes and you want to sort of that multi-vector approach. I think that goes a long way. So.
Yeah, I know when I interviewed for the CCST, like sitting at that table, they asked us like, what happens if you draft a policy proposal and whoever you're working with says no? And then like, how do you respond to that? How do you deal with that kind of difference in opinion when they're saying, and you have to realize that you could probably write this down, just like, there are other contextual factors that are outside of my control, and I have to understand that.
There were days when facts didn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's few days, but some days it's true. So, and you just have to have they look for that type of personality, right? Because they want everyone to be happy. They want the office to be happy. They want you to be happy. They don't want you to be miserable. And so if they feel like you're a rigid type of personality, it's probably not going to be a good match. And, few and far between. I definitely had some days where I left the office and I was just like, what just happened, right? But there were also days where, honestly, like, my boss had a bill in front of him that he wasn't going to support, and I thought it was really good policy. It was criminal policy, actually, it turns out, but I went into his office, and everyone in the office was ready for like all the advocates to start calling, right? It was a big bill. Like, they knew that there was grassroots like calls off the hook, and I went into his office, talked to him about it, and then came out, and they were just like, "Oh my God, are we gonna get calls?" And I was like, "No." He like switched his vote, and they're like, "What did you do?" I said, "I showed him a graph." Like, sometimes being able to compile information in a way that is accessible to your member and very simple is also very valuable. And I was a hero of the office that day because the phones were silent. But something that simple that we take for granted as scientists can be very impactful, or it can't be, and you just have to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, so. Being able to like condense a large volume of data into something simple that they can like quickly understand, and also being able to write for different kinds of community. And because so with my office, I work with all these PhDs that are in a different field than me, but then we're also working with a lot of community groups, and being able to say, all right, if I'm writing a report for them, it needs to sound different than when I'm talking to my boss. And I'm learning a lot of that, not even from the PhDs in my office. I'm talking to like all the master's level communication staff that are saying, this is actually how you build this. And I'm also you want to try to learn and highlight the ways that you could visualize data. If I know in the NIH and some of the bigger agencies, if you're a data analyst, if you can say, I can take a lot of data, simplify it into a way that you could just show a picture, and people are like, got it. Like, people do love pictures and understand. Infographics, and there are good and bad infographics, and that's a whole workshop, and it's a great thing to experience. Like letting people just talk about how to best represent data, and like, here's the kind of graph you want to use for this and that versus that. It's fun, but it's down to these. But you should be able to say, I could present data effectively. They always want that. They always want someone that can convey information quickly. So.
There's one in the back.
Yeah, so this is kind of related to the previous question, but are there like certain STEM fields or PhD fields that are more highly represented or like sought after for these fellowships, or is it more like you were saying, like you're well-rounded as a scientist, your leadership abilities?
You do get a flavor for some of the agencies. Some of the agencies have different like recruitment classes, but I know with Chris and like looking on the Hill, there are usually like 30 different societies, and so it's very limited to the society will pick the fellow, so that you know which fellows will be represented on the Hill. I know like certain fields, BME I think has one, but like immunology and stuff like infectious disease that I would want to have gone to, they've one, and that's it. And so it changes kind of what it's. But at the agencies, I'm infectious disease, but I work in a lot of non-communicable diseases that do a lot of behavioral intervention. So I have no content area expertise, but I have all this analytical expertise that I brought to the office, and I get to learn all of that during the year. And then, but you have all of these different people, and like sitting at like a happy hour, because we have a happy hour every week. That's part of the process. You guys should really that's part of the networking. So you do that, and it's just you sit there and you're like, I'm people that do ecology, works with alligators, do behavioral interventions, do advocacy for LGBT rights in third world countries, doing all these different things that have nothing to do with what I did in my graduate student experience, and you see that it's just a wide spectrum of people doing a lot of different things. So, and they're coming from a lot of different ages. So, like, again, happy hour will be a 65-year-old man. His kids are older than me, but he decided to take 2 years off Boeing to come hang out, and not hang out, but like learn how to do policy. So.
Well, first I wanted to highlight like the fortunate you are as Americans to have this many organizations that want to link science with
So
politics.
true.
Because I mean, I'm from Colombia. We lack a lot of those organizations. I'm like, whoa. I really like it, but I feel that science and politics are both power, right? So you're talking power with power, like science and politics, which is great. Which I mean, many countries would like more science and politics. But I wonder in your
guys want to go first?
Sure. How we do it through a number of ways. We do it through our consensus study processes. Right now, we have one going on the 2016 elections, and it's reviewing largely the technologies that used in the 2016 elections and cybersecurity issues. But it also gets into sort of deeper questions about access to voting and representation. We look. It's not just sort of science in the most traditional sense. We did a big report on the skilled technical workforce. This was something that is the middle tier of the technical workforce, not the scientists and engineers of the world, but that was something that I think had a lot of political traction. The energy grid resilience report that we just put out in August has suddenly gained a ton of traction in the political sphere, largely because of Puerto Rico, and because suddenly there's a very big, very human tragedy playing out before everyone's eyes, and just by luck of timing, we put out a big report on resilience of the energy grid. So some of it's just timing, and some of it's actually we take on social issues. What we don't do as a national academies is we don't, and this is sometimes we get a lot of resistance internally within larger scientific enterprise. We don't advocate. We don't, for instance, speak up or speak out against politicians if they are perceived as anti-science, for instance. We don't take those kinds of stands. That isn't what the academies was built for. And if we did, we would cease to exist as a national academies. We would not be allowed to provide independent, objective advice to the nation if we started taking sort of political stances. There are other organizations for that.
And I would say for CCST, so aside from the fellowship, CCST is very similar to National Academies in terms of how it conducts its studies and the types of things it works on. They also have a separate arm that's wrapped around kind of education, and so they're trying to figure out how to increase both the efficacy and the opportunity for people to obtain sort of like layman's materials, right? So K through 12 education, or whether it's getting it more into colleges. But I think there's a real focus on K through 12 to try to understand how we can kind of percolate scientific understanding down to people who are kind of the next generation of thinkers and thought leaders. A separate way to answer your question would be, if you work in a legislative office, you talk to a lot of constituents. Both reasonable and unreasonable on the phone, right? And I think that was a big learning experience for me, especially when if there's a controversial bill up. There are a lot of people that are really not afraid to call their members. You should also not be afraid to call your members if you have an opinion. And as a staffer, if you sometimes you just kind of take the yes or no and then you hang up the phone, right? But sometimes you get into conversations, and that's another way that you can interact, especially in a district, I think, that was as politically involved as my boss's district was. They were all very, very active in their political environment. So that was another good way to connect.
Yeah, and I don't know about your agencies, but we talk about stakeholder, and it varies. So stakeholder sometimes is the scientist, either junior faculty, senior faculty. We're always talking about stakeholders, but we're also talking about people, especially in my office in a personalized way. Is I got to sit on federal discussion panels looking at youth suicide prevention. We're looking at the obesity epidemic and how to monitor and use innovative new technologies to kind of see how the built environment does that. But part of that is how methodologically can we do this? How can we interact with different people at different levels of that? So from everyone in the neighborhood to people at the policy level to scientists that are investigating this, all this thing. So I think a lot of the agencies do understand the public is one of the people that they engage with at all times, and when you do something that the public disagrees with, they will call the legislator like that. They'll call your office. We've definitely we did one on the we did a report a couple years before the opioid epidemic about how to use opioids to manage chronic pain. And there was a big response of a lot of the advocacy community. And we heard that because some of the stuff that we're doing is we're always putting out our reports online to allow the public to comment, and they commented. And like we have to respond to that in what we're doing, because it's not just what the researchers are saying, this is the best course of action. It's also how the public is actually doing. And really, speaking at the NIH has a big focus on dissemination and implementation. And a lot of that is understanding the communities that you'll be involved with, and you're trying to get a particular initiative, a particular intervention, a particular treatment activated in that community. You have to understand that community well enough to say this is you have to tailor it in this particular way to actually make it efficacious. Because if it may work on a non-nationally representative sample where they developed this particular intervention, but then when you're saying, oh, I'm introducing it into a community of color, or I'm introducing it in a rural environment where they don't have the same access to care, those are two different environments, and you have to understand that perhaps your initial policy and the way that you developed this thing was not actually built correctly. And so there's a big push in the NIH to say, all right, we need to work with people that work with these communities to figure out how to actually get them actively involved in taking up a lot of the interventions. So
I will just say one other thing. Every single project that we do, and when we put out a report at the National Academies, my office looks at it through a political lens. We say, what are the broad political implications of this report? Often the answer is none or next to none, but often it's quite the opposite, and we have to we have to sort of build up our resources around that. So.
Robbie mentioned when you were speaking that his biggest piece of advice when he's starting a new experience is to ask, what do I need to do to get the most out of this experience? How would you answer that for each of your respective fellowships? I'm sure the answers are kind of similar, but.
I would say, like, for me, what I did early on in the office was just start knocking on doors and asking to help people. Like, do you have a project that you're looking for? And I just started signing up, and I kind of had a running inventory of, like, I know how much time I have available in my day and my week to actually get some of these projects. And I would start signing myself up for these, to help in these groups. I'm like, oh, you need this analysis done. Well, don't know, but I could help. I could help do this. I can help you do some of this menial labor, especially when you're early on, when you're just trying to like build up skills. Sometimes it takes you a little bit of time, but that time you could be used to be making those connections. Be known around your office, say hello to people, be pleasant. The other thing is start picking up skills as fast as you possibly can. Just like I've become the go-to person. Like our office is kind of small, and with that, it's whatever skill sets are in the room. And me developing a unique skill set allows me to be pulled into a lot of different projects to get me put out there. And be your own advocate, be shameless about it sometimes, by the way. Everyone, yes, I'm gonna take cards as soon as I leave here. But be a shameless advocate for yourself, because you should be able to be your own hype man. Don't be braggadocious, but you should be your own advocate at any given time. Just because, and it helps you keep track of your skills. So start a little skill inventory saying, oh, I have the ability to do this, I'm adding this, I'm adding this. And if you keep that going, it usually is very helpful.
I have two answers for that. I think maybe because my experience was in a little more of a political environment than an agency is, I think the first thing is to keep an open mind. And to be willing to talk to everybody and to listen to everybody. And I think the second piece is to seek out and have an appreciation for solutions that are nuanced. I think that it's the us or them mentality is really damaging, not only politically speaking, but also I think personally speaking, because no one will continue to knock on your door if they think they already know what you think. And so just being willing to talk through any problem or discussion is incredibly important.
Those are great. I just add to it. Know your broader sort of, again, the word ecosystem. I use it a lot, but it's really, really important. Know how you fit. Know what you're working on fits in to this much broader stakeholder base, and really that is lifting your head up every now and then and looking to see who's paying attention to you, who's going to be paying attention to your work when it's done. They may not even know that it exists, but that's really how you can measure impact. knowing who cares and who's going to use it. So,
And how?
and how. It may be used against you. Yeah. Merzine. Yeah. That's a great question. It's January. Yeah, I thought it was early in the summer, but it starts in January. We're at this point full for the 2018 fellowship season, but next year starts over. So.
Okay, sounds like we've exhausted our questions for the moment. Thanks very much to our panelists.
Thank you.